Good morning and welcome to Rising Fridays. We have a great show for you today. Ryan, it's awesome to have you once again, all the way from the Rising Fridays Vermont Bureau.
Good to be here holding down the Vermont fort. And so I was driving the other day, by the way, and I thought you'd find this interesting. I was listening to NPR, and they said, of course, got to have NPR on in the car, either that or Fish on Sirius XM. And they said, upcoming, we're going to have basically the final series. They used the word series in Congress's January 6th hearing, and I was really struck by the term series, like the last in their series. And I thought that was actually fairly accurate in a way to describe what has been this interesting arc that they've presented. So let's talk for a second just about the performance aspect of this entire thing, because you said something just before we went on air that I thought was pretty insightful, that it has a lot of kind of true crime genre similarities to it, which I think helps explain its popularity with the public and also the impact, I think, real impact that it's having on public opinion.
Yeah, and we have a big show. We have John Lubecki is here to talk about psychedelics. Philip Wegman's here to talk about President Biden's COVID diagnosis. But last night, just sitting down and watching a chunk of the January 6th hearings, it really did strike me at how they brought in an ABC News producer and they wove this as a narrative that was almost dispensed in sort of serial doses. You know, how they used to, everything used to be sort of serialized, like fiction. It was printed in the papers week to week or month to month, and it really has felt like that. And from my perspective, that's been very cynical. And their idea that they're coming back in September after the recess with more is cynical to me, because it tells me if they have pertinent public information, they're not releasing it. They're saving it to dispense it in doses that are incremental towards the election. They're doing this in a midterm year, and we know they've told places like the New York Times that they hope that this affects the outcome of the election. But the way that they do it I have never seen anything like this in Congress, Ryan, and I'm curious as to what you think, because you could talk about the Benghazi hearings, you could talk about Watergate, you could talk about Whitewater, you can talk about a lot of different things that Congress has sort of chewed over in the investigative format. Nothing has ever really looked like this. Some of it's been very interesting. The Trump impeachment trials, they really did try to weave something together with those, but it doesn't come close to what they're doing with this.
Right. For the parallels, you have to go to Prestige Cable. I mean, Sopranos, then they split their season finale. Game of Thrones, they kind of split their season finale, or their final season. I mean, which then builds suspense and anticipation for it. The congressional hearings, though, since the advent of television, have been something that have really brought the country together in a way that, not that they all agree on what they're seeing, but they're all kind of watching that. And actually, the first were in the 50s with the mob, these huge mob hearings where you would describe like walking down the streets of New York City while these mob hearings were on, and every bar would be playing these hearings, like really exposing kind of the inner workings of the mafia, and that's, I think, kicked off America's fascination actually with mafia. Like fiction followed that later, and then of course you had the Watergate hearings, which gripped an entire country. But then I do think as media evolved and splintered, it became harder for Congress to do that again, because you didn't have just 3 networks anymore, and if all 3 put them on, then everybody's going to have to watch it. So I think basically the system evolved to the new reality and created what is much more kind of entertaining content than the previous stuff was entertaining, but you'd have to sit through 5 hours where they're packing it all into 90 minutes or so, and pre-recording key interviews so you don't sit through the whole interview waiting for the key spot. Like, here's the key spot, and then dropping it. Sure, is it cynical? Absolutely. I mean, it's political. It's the goal here is to kind of, I guess, bring Trump down.
But Ryan, it's bipartisan.
Yeah. It is bipartisan. And they might as well have some of the Democrats label themselves Republicans at this point, because that's all that Cheney and Kinzinger are. Even though they haven't really changed, as far as I can tell, their underlying politics. I would still, Cheney is still Cheney, even if she's been kind of booted out of this Republican Party. But it just on in terms of effectiveness, it has been impressive, and what they've been doing is saving some of their best bits, and we could roll that now. This is, I mean, the Josh Hawley running across the Capitol. That's one of the kind of funny moments. It's not funny to see somebody running for their life, but the guy who was kind of pumping his fist to the crowd, and then a couple hours later,
not the same crowd though.
Running, not necessarily the same crowd. There might have been one or two people in that same crowd. Yes, not exactly the same crowd. But there's a narrative arc that's going to get people talking about it. But this Trump clip that they had, right? This is pretty revelatory moment.
I would like to begin by addressing the heinous attack yesterday. And to those who broke the law, you will pay. You do not represent our movement. You do not represent our country. And if you broke the law, you can't say that. I'm not going to, I already said you will pay. The demonstrators who infiltrated the Capitol have defied the seat of justice. It's defiled, right? See, I can't see it very well. Okay, I'll do this. I'm going to do this. Let's go. But this election is now over. Congress has certified the results. I don't want to say the election's over. I just want to say Congress has certified the results without saying the election's over, okay?
But Congress is certified. Now Congress is
Yeah,
certified.
right.
Now Congress
I didn't say over, so let me see. Go to the paragraph before. Okay? I would like to begin by addressing the heinous attack yesterday. Yesterday is a hard word for me.
Just take it out. The heinous attack.
Good. Take the word yesterday, because it doesn't work with the heinous attack on our country. Say on our country. Want to say that?
No, keep it.
My only goal was to ensure the integrity of the vote. My only goal was to ensure the integrity of the vote.
Well, I remember when I think Sagar interviewed Donald Trump, and this has been consistent for pretty much anybody who interviews Trump. They come away from it saying he's the same person in public and in private, and that's what I think. The primary sources, back to this point about true crime, are extremely compelling, and it's always interesting to get more information. It's always interesting to get more primary source documents or primary source video, whatever it is. In this case, I connect this one with what Sarah Matthews said last night, which was, I think I put it in my radar because it was one of the things that stood out to me. She said there was resistance to sending out an additional tweet about quelling the violence because they didn't want it to look like the media. They didn't want to give the media a win. That was the phrasing. They didn't want to give the media a win. And I think you're seeing the same thing with Trump's sort of resistance to that language about certifying the election that, to be clear, is dangerous. But the best way I heard it put was, actually it was Ben Sass, who after January 6th said that this complaints about the election were, quote, playing with fire. And I think that's the best way to say it. You're sort of winking and nodding at something, and you're sort of building and stirring it into a very, I think, dangerous situation when people have no reason to trust media. The last thing they need to then be told is to be misled by the people who are correct that they have no reason to trust media. And so it just creates, I think, a sort of toxic cocktail. But that's where this all comes from. And I wish a lot of people on the left and in the media would understand that. You don't have to agree with it. I don't even agree with it. But just understand that this is coming from a place of, like, when the media gets so many things wrong and is so unfair, then it creates this reaction on the right, and certainly among Trump people, where they say, we don't want to give the media a win. And it gets, again, like, that's not an appropriate reaction, but it is what's happening. And it's not a good place to be in as a country.
Right. It's another function of our tribalism, too. And another key insight from recently was from one of his spokespeople, who said there was just no way he was ever going to, publicly acknowledge or mourn the death of the first officer who died, shortly after the January 6th riot, because it would then seem to him or seem to his people like he was blaming them for it.
Yep.
And he said those are his people, and he's just not going to do that. And I just and that's his tribe. He's ride or die, and that's who he's sticking with. And so I don't think anybody can come out of this hearing without at least understanding that.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, that is a really important thing to understand. And we heard that a little bit. They played a clip of, I think it was Jamie Herrera Butler from Washington, paraphrasing what she was told about Kevin McCarthy's conversation with Donald Trump, saying basically that he was saying to Kevin McCarthy, these aren't my people, that's Antifa. And when Kevin McCarthy said, no, those are your people, Trump said, well, maybe they just care more about this election than you do, Kevin. And so what you see happening there is a man who is so completely distrustful of the media that in the moment, as it was happening, a lot of people were swayed by this idea that just the vast majority of the rioters were somehow leftist infiltrators, Antifa infiltrators. And I remember when I was reporting from the Capitol, live from that scene, I was getting just hammered by a lot of people on the right who have no good reason to trust the media and were saying, this doesn't look like something conservatives do. And Ryan, a couple of weeks ago, I showed you a video that I took where there were people climbing up on statues, and one of the Trump protesters was screaming at him, you look like effing leftists, you look like effing liberals, get down from the statue. And so it was a really strange set of affairs. It was a very strange scene at the Capitol. And so you see Trump not even being able to trust what's happening very plainly. And when he's told it's happening, he doesn't want to sort of, I think, concede that there's any connection between point A and point B.
The other development, and I'm curious for your take on this, seems to be that there's more support now for that claim about the big fight inside the SUV Beast, this famous moment where he's really hammering at his Secret Service detail to take him to the Capitol. I'm the effing president. Take me to the Capitol. With his one aide saying that she was told that he lunged and tried to grab the wheel. There does seem to be more support for that. Where do you think that stands now? And on the right, is that just a thing of mockery at this point, or is there an open mind to that? Well, maybe this might have actually happened.
I think that was a damaging moment for the committee because it was so quickly thrown into question. And I think substantively, there were substantive reasons to distrust it when you had a lot of testimony from different people coming out and saying, no, and it just seemed implausible in the first place. And so I think that started to plant the seed that the witnesses who seem credible, right? Like most of these witnesses have been articulate, have come across well, and the committee emphasizes over and over again, these were Trump loyalists. They're lifelong Republicans in many cases. So the committee wants people to believe they have no incentives to sort of flip. Although I think if you want to work in DC, it's actually your incentive is definitely to flip. But if that's the case, yeah. So I think that made it start to seem like things might not be as they appear. And
but
that was
even with the new people coming forward and saying no, this something like this happened. Like that's.
I think in terms of public perception, yes. I think that was a moment that made the committee look like, even these people who are credible and testifying to their own experiences or seem credible, when something like that can fall apart, it just casts that doubt. I think it casts everything into a sense of doubt. So, and I think it probably made some people tune out, say, well, if I'm just going to be lied to.
That's probably a lot of our viewers, like maybe half of them probably are tuned out. So I would say this, the main guy denying this has denied basically everything else that people have said about him from a bunch of other people, despite there being lots of corroborating witnesses. The Secret Service leadership is not turning over their text messages from that day because they say they accidentally deleted them. We'll find out hopefully we'll find out whether or not that was an accident, but it's awfully coincidental that they deleted these text messages after getting requests for them. And now the MPD officer and others are saying, no, something like this happened. So I would just caution people to be not to be too easily lied to by people on your side either. Just because a guy involved says, "Oh no, I didn't do that," doesn't necessarily mean that he didn't do that.
Yeah, and just the closing point, because we have to wrap, is that it's actually a perfect place to wrap, because that's what's so disappointing to me about the committee in general, is that there are really legitimate questions that actually do need to be answered about January 6th. The Secret Service text messages are a really good example of that. There's more we need to know about how this happened, how the Capitol building was breached by a mob, and I've sort of lost my faith, and I think a lot of the public, as you say, Ryan, and probably like our audience is with me on this, that I don't believe that they're seriously trying to get at some of these questions. That doesn't mean they aren't dredging up some interesting evidence in the process, but I feel like it's all a much more serious business than some of the cynical strategies that they've employed. But on that note, we have to leave it there, and we'll be back to tell you what's on our radars right after this.